campaigns requires really good tracking, requires consistent tracking, and it usually requires tracking across multiple systems. It's not enough just to know about website visits. It's not enough just to know about donations. Real understanding and analytical insights come from unifying multiple streams of data. For most of our tools clients, the sort of two systems that they're using to track data are Google Analytics on the web side and the BSD tools on the other. And so we find ourselves answering a pretty simple question a lot, which is, how do I share data between the tools and my website's Google Analytics profile? Luckily at BSD, we have spent a lot of time thinking about this question, and we think we've come up with a solution that will keep analysts happy, will keep web developers happy, and most importantly, make sure that you are actually able to run better campaigns by putting the right data in the right systems and empowering you to make good decisions in as near real time as Google's servers will allow you. Before I dive into the nuts and bolts of how our Google Analytics integration works, though, I want to spend a little more time setting up the problem. So when users interact with your website, they shouldn't see it as a website and a CRM and a social presence, right? They expect a consistent, cohesive cross-channel experience. Whether you're a small nonprofit, whether you're a global brand, the pace of development of how organizations communicate with users across the web has really continued to accelerate over the past couple of years. And so this level of cross-channel cohesion is now kind of the standard. To achieve this, digital programs have to connect multiple data sources. There is no one single source of truth for all points of data about your users. But Google Analytics, while it's a free solution and probably the best solution for just about everyone on this call as a web analytics platform, has no default plugins or hooks to the BSD tools to be able to actually see those super valuable conversion actions that users are taking on your pages. And so what we've built is a tool that basically exposes the conversion actions and sourcing information that the BSD tools is recording to Google Analytics as well. As a quick refresher, I think everyone on this call is familiar with Google Analytics and the BSD tools, at least to some degree, but Google Analytics tracks pure web data. Only what can be gleaned from the information that's sent to request to page by the user's browser. Everything is anonymized. It doesn't pass any personally identifiable information at the user level, and it thinks about sourcing in terms of identifying where traffic came from. So did a user get referred from a social media site? Were they referred from email? Were they referred from a Google search? Sourcing is understood primarily in the context of acquisition, and then once they're on the page, by default, what Google Analytics is basically doing is just tracing their path along the site. There's actually not a lot of richness in the data, especially if you're running more conversion-focused, sophisticated programs. On the other side, the BSD tools tracks CRM data, signups, contributions, addresses, phone numbers, first name, last name. And it's highly personalized, right? If you've sent emails using Twig, you know that we can attribute every email address and contribution and use those to target a user. And the tools focuses sourcing on attribution, right? So not just which sources brought users to the website, but which sources are driving users to make a specific donation or a specific sign up. And so the paradigms kind of don't overlap if you're thinking about the universes of data that they collect. But we can fix that. So in our agency work, we are often trying to solve the problem for clients of exposing more data in Google Analytics, giving our analysts or your analysts the ability to dive more deeply and segment your traffic, attribute conversions, recognize revenue in Google Analytics, and use the e-commerce functionality. And we found ourselves implementing the same types of code over and over again, same snippets to get tools data into Google Analytics. And so the challenge we took on was to bridge the gap between Google Analytics, our web analytics system, and the tools CRM in an automated, repeatable, low-touch way. And we call this GAI, the Google Analytics integration for the BSD tools. It's an open source library. We license it under the Apache license. So you can go onto GitHub, and we'll have a link for you. You can go onto GitHub and read through every line of code to make sure we're not doing anything nefarious. Promise we aren't. It is high performance. It will add no more than a few milliseconds to site load times. It's very lightweight for an analytics library. Most of what it does is just expose wrappers on top of Google Analytics. It is for digital professionals by digital professionals, by which we mean it's targeted to answer the questions that we need to help our clients succeed in their digital programs. And we really think that there's a layer of value added on top of a less opinionated, more generic library like Google's AutoTrack.js or Google Analytics on steroids, these kind of catch-all Google Analytics augmentation tools that aren't really focused on a specific domain or problem or platform. And then the last piece is obviously, in addition to its just generic tracking enhancements, it is highly customized for the BSD tools and can handle all sorts of common use cases like tracking signups, conversions, contributions as e-commerce out of the box without any need for additional configuration on your part. So actually putting it on the page is incredibly simple. So you're probably used to implementing Google Analytics on your websites, or at least on your tools pages, by just copying and pasting code from Google Analytics into your site's wrappers. And then obviously every page, donation page, sign up form you create with that wrapper will be tracked in Google Analytics. This default snippet is simple. You probably have seen it before. To add GAI, all you have to do is plug in one additional script call to that snippet to include the Google Analytics integration library, and it will immediately start sending this extra set of data to the tools. It'll start syncing your contribution and sign up actions to the tools. It's worth noting here that all of the examples I'm going to show you and everything I'm going to talk about is the modern universal analytics paradigm. If your organization still uses the older asynchronous analytics, GAI will still work. It'll actually seamlessly detect which library, which analytics version you're using, and it will dispatch the right type of event and tracking calls to that library. There's no additional configuration you have to do to get it to work for the asynchronous style. Drop in your wrapper, save the wrapper, you're good to go. It's really that easy. It gets a big thumbs up from our web developers. So that's kind of the basic overview of what GAI is, and hopefully I've convinced you it is not an onerous task to get it onto your web pages. But getting the data in is kind of the least interesting part of this. What's really valuable is what you can do with the data and how you can use it to gain a more complete picture of what your constituents are doing with the tools and on your website more generally. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Orwin, who's a digital analyst here in New York, who's going to talk through how you can actually take the data that's now flowing into your Google Analytics profile and use it to make smarter decisions and learn new things about who's using your website.
Cool. Thanks, Brendan. If you guys followed along with all that code stuff with Brendan, good on you. Y'all are just as nerdy as we are, or more specifically, just as nerdy as Brendan here. I am decidedly less code and tech savvy. I care more about the numbers and strategy. What does this GAI stuff mean in a practical sense? Well, GAI allows me to track lots of things and gain a lot of insight into my client's work. So let's go ahead and jump into Google Analytics and figure out what we can figure out, okay? I have a few examples that I think are pretty relevant and pretty awesome. These are a few of the questions that come up pretty frequently in my work. They range from the super simple and straightforward, like PDF downloads, to the most complex e-commerce configuration. Real quick, what does most of GAI look like? It's going to be located in the events module of Google Analytics. And this is what that might look like for those of you who don't have GAI or haven't created any of your own custom events already. Pretty darn blank. This screenshot might be a little bit small, so if you're in Google Analytics, you can navigate here into the behavior tab under the events drop down. With GAI, however, we have all these cute little events that show up. Each event in GAI has 3 attributes associated with it. You have a category, an action, and a label. These just offer greater detail for each event. Generally speaking, category is the broadest attribute and label is the most specific. But if you're writing your own events, you can customize these however you want. Event category is where you're going to find most of the things that GAI populates for us. So that's what we're going to be focusing on right now. So let's answer some of these questions. Let's say your boss comes to you and says, okay, how many people are downloading our annual report? This feels to me like something GA should already do, but it surprisingly doesn't. GAI corrects for that. Back in that events module, we're going to look for an event called file clicks. Sort of like this. You'll have a whole list of event categories. File clicks is where you're going to see all of those .pdfs come through. And if you click on that thing here, you're going to go one level deeper. It's going to isolate that event category, and you'll see here file clicks. Right up at the top, you'll see that you are actually in the event category. So we're going to want to navigate over and toggle to event action. And the moment you do that, you will see all sorts of fun stuff. These are all of the forms or all of the PDFs that are affiliated with those file clicks. So you can see pretty quickly, here's an annual report. That's pretty awesome. 2014, don't judge us. And then you can tell your boss that, hey, that annual report was downloaded 70 times or what have you, whatever time range that you're specifically looking at. So that's a pretty straightforward question that you can answer here. This, is something that we should be able to do, and GAI allows you to solve this really simple question easily. Now let's move on to some of the juicier questions that I like to answer. More specifically, in regards to acquisition, right? How are people joining the list? Where are they signing up on the site? And how many people are, coming in from each channel? These are some questions that you can answer sort of to some extent using the BSD tools themselves. But other things like behavior on the website before people join the list or where specifically they're joining is a little harder to get at. So within that event category, we're going to be focusing on something called a completion event. And the completion events here are going to be basically submissions that are associated with actions in the BSD tools. So when you click into that, you will see an event action. You'll see signups, contributions, and quick donate opt-in at the most fundamental level. We're going to be focusing on that sign up completion event, which tells us that someone has joined our list by entering one of those sign up forms on the site. If we click into this sign up event, you will see all sorts of form labels that are associated or affiliated with however you've named these in the BSD tools. So in this instance, I might care about the main sign up form, but you'll be able to see all of those other forms that are there throughout the website as well. So this is sort of interesting. You can see how many people filled out a form or signed up, and this isn't too different from what you could pull natively from the BSD tools. What's more powerful about these completion events is sort of does require a little bit more work on your part. You're going to need to make a goal, right? And you can do this in the admin panel of Google Analytics. I'm not going to walk you guys through how to set up a goal, but the moment that you set up a goal, you can start doing more interesting analyses, right? And here I've navigated into the acquisition tab of Google Analytics, and I've isolated a channel analysis under that traffic overview. And over here on the right-hand side, you can identify and select whatever goal that you've set up. So I've set up a goal for that sign up event, right? That says, register this as a win for us anytime someone signs up. And here you can see a few things, right? You can see how these channels compare to one another, and you can create some type of conversion rate for those specific forms. So as it turns out, our email sign up conversion rate from social is sort of weaker than it is on other channels, which is perhaps frustrating. Maybe the key takeaway here is that, we're sending people, or we're posting on social all sorts of content that, directs people to our blog, and we don't have a really easy way for people to sign up via the blog, right? So in this case, I might go to my client or someone that I'm working with and say, well, maybe we should have a stronger email capture on that blog post, because that's, what we want to capture more emails, and people are reading that from social. So that's the type of analysis that you can do using the completion event. You will have to do a little bit of setup with that goal. The other thing that we might want to do, or that GAI allows us to do, is configure e-commerce. And this allows us to figure out a few key things, like how are our donors getting to the site? What's the performance of our donation forms doing? And how do our digital channels compare to one another? In this instance, we're going to be looking at that e-commerce module under the conversion bucket of Google Analytics. We're not really focusing on events anymore. This is what e-commerce is going to look like if you don't have GAI, or if you haven't configured e-commerce yourself. It's going to be pretty blank. Once you do have this configured, the nice thing that GAI does for us is it says, okay, we are going to look at all of the donation forms that are on the website, and we're going to pretend that those are products. Google Analytics is made for e-commerce sites, and it's assuming that e-commerce means e-commerce, like you're going through a checkout experience and you're buying things on a website like big brands tend to do. GAI just says, nope, we're not in that business. We're just going to treat all of these donation forms as if they were a product. So that's what you're going to be seeing here. More specifically, you'll have this is like what those forms might look like in this module. The other thing that's interesting for us is that product category. This is where you'll be able to drill into specific one-time contributions, recurring contributions, or quick donate contributions, which is all fun and dandy. I'm going to be looking at specifically form completion rate. And in this case, I would want to go and navigate under the behavior tab of Google Analytics and identify my main sign-up form or donation form, what have you. And I will see real quickly here that I have some unique page views available. So to calculate that form completion rate, I'm going to remember back to that main donation form that I had. I'm going to say, okay, we had 245-ish donations made on that main donation form. And I also had about 3,500 unique page views of that form. So that tells me that our form completion rate was about 7%, right? 7% of those people who saw that form finish it, or actually went through and made a contribution. So this tells me a few things. A, that may or may not be satisfactory to me, and I might use this as evidence to further optimize that specific form. So if I'm going to run any type of test on a donation form, I'm going to try to beat this 7% approximately. So that's a good way of seeing exactly how well our donation form is performing. And we can do that because we're treating those donation forms as products, and we can track exactly how many donations are coming through it, and combining that with the specific page view level data that Google Analytics has for us. A different thing that we can answer that I really like doing is within the channel analysis of our acquisition bucket of Google Analytics. There's a little tab up here under that Explorer where you can click e-commerce. And what this allows me to do is to compare our different traffic channels on the website and see how they're performing against one another. So in this instance, what I can see is that organic and direct traffic are our most valuable channels in terms of total revenue. That's pretty awesome. But my most effective channel is going to be email, right? That average value, or that average gift that we can say is coming from email, and that e-commerce conversion rate. That's sort of the conversion rate of all of that traffic that came from email to the website and how it converted and led into a donation. So that's really our quick examples of some of the things that we can do with GAI and what that allows us to analyze on website, and how that might change our strategy from a more practical level. I'm going to pass it back over to Brendan to talk about some more resources and the caveats that go along with GAI.
Awesome. Thanks, Orlin. I love seeing stuff like that. I love getting to see like something we built solving real problems. So not only does GAI do this sort of tight integration between tools conversions and GA, which is probably the most valuable and unique piece of the library, but we've also built in a number of additional tracking features, some sort of standard augmentations of Google Analytics that you would also find in sort of any Google Analytics customization library. So we use the first 5 custom dimensions that Google Analytics makes available. Once you're upgraded to Universal Analytics, you have 20 slots available. So it's not a total takeover of your custom space, but the custom dimensions will use the BSD source, the BSD subsource when it's available, and then as well as looking for some of the other cookies that BSD sets on the page to identify if the user has come from a BSD tools page, if the user came from an email. All of those things give you the ability to really easily create custom dimensions, custom traffic segments. Custom traffic segments to split your users and analyze their behavior, not just in the different groups or categories that Google Analytics makes available, but in the context of how the tools understands them as well. One of the other things we've added, if you've ever coded an email in the tools, you know that sourcing is really important to get right and also tough to get right. We have a tool called the Sorcerer that I'll put in a plug for here that really makes it easier to add both Google Analytics and BSD sourcing. But however you get it done, every link in an email has to go out with a BSD source, a Google Analytics source. Maybe you have another e-commerce or events platform, and you have source parameters coming from that. It's really easy to leave one of them out. GAI has your back. So if you provide tools sourcing, but not any Google Analytics sourcing, so the source and subsource parameter, tool sourcing, GAI will interpolate those into Google Analytics sourcing and attribute the traffic as if you had sourced the link for both Google Analytics and the tools. Vice versa, if you come through with only Google Analytics sourcing and no tool sourcing, GAI will set that on the page so that if you make a tools completion, that will get picked up and fed into the tools. And obviously, if you've provided both sets of sources, it will not override anything you've set manually. Basically, we want your tools to have your back, and in almost every case, any source you can get is better than no sourcing at all, right? The worst thing is a pool of unsourced traffic that donated and you have no idea about why. Another useful piece of functionality that will hopefully make you friends with your web developers is tracking JavaScript errors. So whenever you have an uncaught JavaScript error on your page, which could be something minor, could be a major loss of functionality, that will bubble up as an event in Google Analytics, and you'll be able to see those. You could set a goal on JavaScript errors to alert you of any kind of spike. If one of your donations pages suddenly starts throwing a lot of errors, that's probably something you'd want to know about, and this is another way to help bring that to the attention of you or your web developers, whoever can go in, figure out what's going on, and get it fixed. We also track a couple generic completion types. So conversion events that are not necessarily specific to the BSD tools, but something that you'd want to know about anyway. So anytime you click on a Facebook or Twitter native share button, that will be recorded both as a social event in Google Analytics and also as a standard event. The reason why we use both is that it's a little tougher to use to segment using the social event, and there's no negative outcome to duplicating it. So we want to make sure you can use both the native social tracking capabilities in Google Analytics, but also have the maximum flexibility to segment those users everywhere within the platform. The GAI library will also track a generic form submit event. So we obviously have specific and really customized events for tools, sign up, and donation forms. But in general, if a user is completing a form and giving you some piece of information that's interesting, and even if you don't know you want to look at it now, it may be something that you're interested in looking at in the future. Because there's no way to go and reprocess or reclaim historical data in Google Analytics, we just pass on a generic form completion event with the page URL and the name of the form, so that if you're ever curious about how users are interacting with any type of specific content on your page, you can go back and drill down into that. The last piece of generic tracking is site exits. So Google Analytics is great at telling you where people came from. It's not great at telling you where they went. And in a lot of times, especially if you're trying to understand, why does a page have a high exit rate, or why does a page have a high bounce rate? Are users just closing the tab? Are they clicking off to another website? This exit tracking will send an event every time someone clicks a link to a domain that's not the domain of your website, so the domain they're on currently. And you can use that to figure out which users are leaving your site, where are they going, and that might tell you what they're interested in, what they're not finding on your site, what they want more information about, and hopefully help you think strategically about content and testing. So all that's fun and great. I want to leave you with two warnings and things to look out for to make sure you're using GA most effectively and staying on the right side of our Google overlords. So personally identifiable information, that stuff like name, email address, physical address, all that is a core competency of the tools, and we have very strict security standards in place to make sure we can store that data safely. Google isn't interested in being in that game. So Google's terms of service prevent sending any PII to Google Analytics. Google Analytics doesn't gather that data by default. GAI is configured so that it will never, by default, send your users PII to Google Analytics. And it's worth noting that it can be tempting to try and get stuff into Google Analytics that would let you drill down to a user level, but Google has an itchy trigger finger and will not hesitate to either shut down your profile or delete data if they see you sending in information you shouldn't. So keep it anonymized, keep it aggregated, and you can still send really valuable data from the tools even without appending your constituents' email addresses to it. The other thing to mention is with the rise of modern JavaScript frameworks and single-page applications, websites are getting more complex from an implementation perspective, and there are some challenges to getting analytics working correctly on those sites. Anytime you've got a single-page application, it can be hard for Google Analytics to understand what it should view as a page view and what it should just view as any kind of generic interaction with the page. Google has superb documentation on exactly how to configure this, and we'll link out to that at the end of this presentation. But your web developers should be able to help you handle any kind of complex situation. And once you've got that implemented, GAI will continue to work exactly as it would if you had a more traditional website. If you have no idea what I'm talking about and you just want to make this work on your tools forms, that's totally fine. This really only applies to more sophisticated applications. Anytime you're building a page through the tools and just putting it live and sending users to it, that will always work with GAI. The other thing to mention is that if you have a scenario where you're sending information to the tools over an API rather than using a native form or a tools page, that's not something GAI is going to pick up by default. We've tried to work around this by exposing a generic event handler that you could use to send data either in the success callback of an AJAX call or whenever you've sort of consider an action to have been completed by a user, and then you're sending that data to BSD asynchronously. GAI has a function that's just plugged into jQuery and will allow you to send tools completion events, not manually, I guess, to manually configure completion events to go to the tools. We've got documentation on that on our website, and we're always happy to answer more questions about it. So a few resources to get you started digging in further. We have an article called How Do I Integrate My Google Analytics with the BSD Tools? That is basically the knowledge base version of this presentation and should get you up and running quickly with GAI on tools pages. It never hurts to really understand how the sourcing and attribution models work in the BSD tools. We've got several articles in our knowledge base about both tools sourcing and Google Analytics sourcing, and you can dig into those to understand how your traffic is being attributed. And then finally, for the developers in the room, included a link to the public source code for the Google Analytics integration. It's on our Blue State Digital GitHub organization. You're welcome. It's permissively licensed. You're welcome to take it, extend it, add cool features to it. We love pull requests back if you think you've got something that the community could make use of, and we're always happy to field questions about the code. So I think that's what I had wanted to get through, and I wanted to make sure we leave a good chunk of time for questions. I think with that, I'll kick the mic back over to Jilly, and she can start testing our knowledge.
Yes, I love this part. Great. So thanks so much, guys. If you have questions that have come up throughout the presentation, some people are using the chat module. You can also use the Q&A that should be in the top left portion of your screen. So start to enter those in. We'll start with a few that have come from Kurt. So the first one is, how does it all play out on BSD tool pages, page forms within the BSD domain versus BSD tools forms embedded in someone's own website, aka their own domain?
So this is a case that we've handled and thought about. When you're on a tools page, the way completion events work is if you've ever encountered the BSD tracker JavaScript object that gets added into a page, anytime you enable tracking on a form, there's a toggle to enable tracking. That is basically allowing the tools to populate a JavaScript object onto the page that's got that completion data. When you're on an external page, so when you're not on a BSD hosted domain, that object doesn't get created by default. Instead, what happens is there's a URL parameter called TD that will get appended to an action, and that contains a hash value that basically contains the value of that JavaScript object, which GAI, when it detects that parameter, will call out to your tools install and decode that and try to populate the object onto the page. That works the vast majority of the time out of the box. It doesn't always, simply because there are a massive number of ways that things can be implemented on the web, so I never want to promise 100% coverage off of domains I can't control. But the worst case scenario would be that you could have your own snippet of code that just handled that decode operation on the URL parameter and would populate the object onto the page where GAI could get at it. I think we've got a knowledge base article about the action tracker and TD code parameters that I see Jilly making a note to send out. And so you can kind of start there for digging into how all that works.
Cool. And then a follow-up, why use BSD generic event handler instead of using the vanilla GA generic event handler?
No reason. If it's a little bit of syntactic sugar that works across universal and asynchronous analytics. If you're comfortable with writing your own Google Analytics code, totally do your own thing. Google Analytics works all on the string values of these labels and names and attributes. So if you want to, code your own type of completion and have it marry in with the completions that GAI is sending, that's totally doable. And you can do that either using the analytics function or using the native GA event call.
Awesome. So another one, what about having multiple GA integrations on the same page? Are conflicts possible? Multiple GA script wrappers from multiple platforms? Question mark.
This is where it gets really fun. So GAI assumes the standard name for your trackers. By default, the name of the Google Analytics object is, in Universal Analytics, is GA. This is actually configurable if you want to dive into the script and break down the Google Analytics snippet yourself. The GAI doesn't interact with that. That's something that could be added if you wanted to sort of write a little bridge into the code, but by default, GA is going to assume that it's sending data to any tracker with the standard name on the page. If you're trying to sandbox multiple trackers, that's a bit more of a thorny issue, maybe either through Google Tag Manager or through you explicitly managing 2 or 3 different analytics systems on the same page. I think the easiest solution there is probably to go through and actually modify GAI in that case, because it's a hard solution to genericize across every client who could possibly use it.
Thank you. And then I think we're going to go one layer deeper here. There's a big one. What is the bQuery jQuery fork I keep seeing in your code?
Wow. So I'm glad that I had a conversation at lunch with one of our developers one day. That's really the answer to this question. So bQuery is a slightly modified version of jQuery that's used within the tools. I believe it was originally written to fix some of the issues with delegation in jQuery 1.4.1. And it's kind of persisted even as jQuery has evolved past that as a dependency. I would say in general, you probably already are using jQuery on the page. Google Analytics will look for jQuery and try to use it. It will fall back to bQuery if it can't. But save yourself the headache of trying to unpack bQuery. Leave that for the tools to use internally and just use a modern distribution of jQuery on your page.
Great, thanks. All right, last call for any questions. But it looks like we'll be able to give you 20 minutes back this Friday. Thank you guys so much. I know this covered a lot, and there's probably a lot that you want to dive into and see for yourself. So you will be receiving an email by Monday with all the links we were referenced and the deck and the recording. And then, feel free to send questions as they come. But, this is a really great feature that we want to be sure that everyone is taking advantage of for their programs. So big thanks to Brendan and Norman for taking the time to walk us through it. All right. Take care, everyone. Have a lovely weekend, and we'll see you soon.